You think that once you fix your life, you will finally be happy. You think that once the money situation stabilizes, once the relationship gets better, once the career clicks into place, once the anxiety fades, once you finally feel ready, you will cross some invisible threshold and land on the other side of everything you have been chasing. You believe deep down that happiness is a destination, that it lives somewhere ahead of you, that the right combination of effort, discipline, and endurance will eventually get you there. That belief feels logical. It feels responsible even. It sounds like the kind of thing a serious, grounded person would say. It sounds like wisdom, but it is not wisdom. It is the single most expensive illusion the modern mind carries. And Abraham Maslow, one of the most important psychologists who ever lived, spent his entire career trying to tell us exactly why this thinking does not just fail to help us. He proved methodically and quietly that this thinking is the root cause of the psychological collapse that most people spend their entire lives trying to escape. You were not failed by your effort. You were failed by a map that was drawn wrong from the beginning. And today we are going to look at the real map. Before we go further, if this kind of content resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This type of reflection is rare, and your support is what makes it possible to keep bringing conversations like this one to more people. It genuinely matters. Let us start with something that almost no one wants to hear. The model of life that most adults are operating under, the one built on grinding, pushing, optimizing, producing, and relentlessly improving, does not lead to peace. It leads to exhaustion dressed up as purpose. And the terrifying part is not that people fail within this model. The terrifying part is that people succeed within it and still end up empty. Think about everything the modern world tells you about how to build a good life. Work harder than everyone else. Be more disciplined. Build the habits. Wake up early. Stay consistent. Outperform. Earn your rest. Deserve your happiness. The entire architecture of self-help, productivity culture, and motivational philosophy rests on a single assumption, which is that the human mind responds proportionally to effort, that more input generates more output, that the correct response to suffering is to work harder, think clearer, and push further. If that were true, the most productive people alive would be the most peaceful people alive. They are not. If that were true, the executives who spent 3 decades building empires would arrive at the top and feel complete. Most of them do not. If that were true, the person who finally lost the weight, got the promotion, fixed the relationship, and organized the finances would settle into a deep, sustained sense that everything is okay, but almost none of them do. They rest for a moment, and then the same restlessness returns, sometimes louder than before, as if achieving the goal only sharpened the awareness of the next gap. This is not a motivation problem. This is not a discipline problem. This is not a mindset problem. These are the words we use when we do not yet understand what is actually happening inside the human being. What is actually happening is structural, and Maslow saw it. Observe your own history for a moment, not the version of your history that you tell other people, not the edited narrative where your struggles make sense and your effort was always justified, the actual, private, unfiltered version of what it has felt like to be you, navigating your life from the inside. Think about a time when you worked towards something for months, maybe years, and you finally got it. The thing you wanted, the goal you had been building toward. And then think about what happened in the days or weeks that followed. Not the celebration, not the announcement, the quiet moment after, when the noise settled and you were alone with yourself again. Was it peace, or was it something quieter and more uncomfortable? Something that felt like the finish line had moved, or like the thing you achieved was slightly less than you had imagined it would be, or like the joy arrived and then left faster than you thought it would, leaving you unsure what to want next. Most people recognize that feeling immediately, and most people respond to it in the same way. They conclude that they did not want the right thing, or that they did not want it enough, or that they need to aim higher, think bigger, push harder. They treat the emptiness as a signal that they have not yet arrived, and so they accelerate. They build a larger goal and throw themselves at it with more intensity. And the same thing happens again. This is not weakness. This is not ingratitude. This is not a character flaw. This is a human being operating on a map that does not correspond to the territory. The effort is real. The dedication is real. The pain is real. But the direction is wrong. And when the direction is wrong, more speed only takes you further from where you need to be. Maslow understood this. He understood it not as a philosophical position, but as a clinical observation. He watched human beings. He studied them. He asked the question that almost no psychologist was asking at the time, which was not what makes people sick, but what makes people fully alive. And what he found changed everything. Here is the inversion that most people never encounter. You have probably spent a significant portion of your life believing that the reason you feel stuck or restless or vaguely unsatisfied despite your best efforts is that you are not motivated enough, that the problem is located somewhere in your willpower, your drive, your commitment to the future. That is not the problem. The problem is not that you lack motivation. The problem is that you are trying to live at the wrong level of need for where your nervous system currently is. It is not the absence of ambition that creates the paralysis. It is the structural mismatch between what your psychology requires right now and what you are demanding it produce for you. You are standing at the base of a building, trying to furnish the penthouse, while the foundation has never been properly laid. That is not laziness. That is not failure. That is physics applied to human psychology. When a person is living in genuine uncertainty about their safety, whether financial, physical, emotional, or relational, and they try to pursue meaning, connection, creative fulfillment, or self-actualization, the system short-circuits. Not because meaning does not matter, not because those aspirations are wrong, but because the nervous system cannot process higher-order desires when lower-order survival is still in question. And here is the part that makes this so difficult to see from the inside. The human mind does not announce this conflict clearly. It does not send you a clean diagnostic message that says your foundational needs are unmet, and therefore your pursuit of higher goals feels hollow. Instead, it generates symptoms. It produces anxiety that seems to be about your career but is actually about stability. It generates loneliness that seems to be about social failure but is actually about safety. It creates a persistent, low-grade dread that gets attached to whatever you are currently focused on, making it feel like the problem is the job, or the relationship, or the city you live in, when the problem is several layers deeper than any of those things. This is why changing the circumstances so rarely changes the feeling. You move cities, and the anxiety comes with you. You leave the relationship, and the loneliness follows. You get the promotion, and the dread finds a new object, because the circumstances were never the cause. They were just the surface onto which a deeper, unmet need was being projected, not the circumstances, the structure underneath. Abraham Maslow was not trying to create a motivational framework. He was trying to describe the architecture of the human soul. When he mapped what he called the hierarchy of needs, he was not building a ladder for achievement. He was charting the sequence in which the human being actually comes alive. He was describing the order in which the nervous system needs to be met before it can expand into its full capacity. At the base of that architecture there is the physical: food, shelter, sleep, the body's basic requirements for survival. When these are absent or uncertain, nothing else competes. The entire organism orients toward securing them. This is not a choice. This is not a preference. This is biology. Above that there is safety, the felt sense that the environment is stable, that tomorrow will not be drastically worse than today, that the ground is solid beneath you. Safety is not just physical, it is psychological. It is the internal experience of predictability, of being able to trust, at least partially, that the world is not about to collapse. When safety is absent, or when its absence has been learned through years of instability, the nervous system does not simply relax once the physical threats are gone. It continues to scan, it continues to prepare. It generates vigilance, anxiety, and a kind of chronic low-level alarm that never fully turns off. Above safety, there is belonging. The need to be seen, to be wanted, to be part of something. The need to love and be loved not as a luxury but as a biological imperative. Human beings did not evolve in isolation. The terror of exclusion is not an emotional weakness. It is a survival response from a species that could not survive alone. Above belonging, there is esteem, the need to feel capable, to feel respected, to have a sense of competence and worth in the world, to believe that your presence here makes some difference to someone. And above all of that, resting at the top of the architecture, is what Maslow called self-actualization, the drive to become what you are capable of becoming, to live in alignment with your deepest nature, to create, to grow, to move toward wholeness. Now here is what most people miss. These levels are not suggestions. They are not interchangeable. The human organism does not move freely between them based on preference or willpower. It moves through them sequentially, and when a lower level is chronically destabilized, the energy required to live at a higher level is simply not available, not unwilling, not unavailable. If this is making you think about your own life right now, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. Sometimes just knowing that other people are sitting with the same weight changes something small but real. Now expand this beyond yourself for a moment, because what Maslow saw in individuals, he also saw in groups. And what he saw in groups, we can now see in entire civilizations. Look at the culture that most people in the developed world are currently living inside. It is a culture that operates as though the lower levels of the hierarchy have been solved, as though physical safety, economic stability, and emotional belonging are baseline assumptions that everyone is already operating from. And because the culture assumes this, it generates constant pressure to perform at the level of esteem and self-actualization. Build your brand, find your purpose, maximize your potential, live your best life, reach the top. These are the messages, and they are delivered relentlessly from every platform, every advertisement, every conversation about success and failure. But the foundational needs have not been solved. Not for most people, not even close. Enormous portions of the population are living with deep economic instability that looks acceptable on the surface because they are employed, but that generates constant low-grade anxiety because the margin between their income and their expenses is so thin that one unexpected event threatens everything. That is not stability. That is survival dressed in the language of normalcy. Large portions of the population are living in profound loneliness that never gets named as such, because the culture has decided that adults do not need to name loneliness. They need to network, they need to grow their social circle. They need to perform connection, while the underlying absence of it grows deeper and quieter with every year. And enormous portions of the population carry a wound to their sense of safety that was not created by current circumstances at all, but by the accumulation of everything that happened to them before they were old enough to process it. Childhoods where love was conditional. Environments where stability could not be trusted, relationships where safety was violated. These are not individual failures. These are structural deficits in the human foundation, operating silently beneath all of the surface-level striving, making every pursuit of meaning feel like a door that opens onto a room that is not quite right. And the culture does not see this, or it does not want to see it, because acknowledging it would require a completely different conversation about what human beings actually need, and that conversation is far more uncomfortable than simply telling people to be more disciplined and try harder. Maslow saw this. He was not just describing a psychological model, he was diagnosing a civilization. Here is where the instinct fails. When most people encounter this framework, something inside them resists it. There is a reflex of rejection, a desire to say, no, that is not my situation, I am fine, the problem is something else entirely. And that resistance is itself worth examining, because the human mind has a very particular relationship with unmet foundational needs. It does not experience them as unmet foundational needs. It experiences them as vague dissatisfaction, as chronic restlessness, as a persistent sense that something is wrong, but being unable to locate exactly what. The mind disguises the depth of the deficit because looking at it directly is too threatening. If the foundation is unstable, the entire structure of your self-concept needs to be re-evaluated. If the problem is not your discipline but your unmet safety need, then the entire narrative of simply working harder falls apart. And for many people, that narrative is all they have. So the mind protects it. You do not enjoy thinking about the idea that what you are missing is not ambition but security. Not because it is not true, but because if it is true, it means that the solution is not to push harder. And pushing harder is what you know. Pushing harder is the only move you have been taught. The mind will tell you that Maslow's framework is reductive, that humans are more complex than a pyramid, that you cannot generalize about psychological needs across different people and contexts. These are not arguments. These are defenses, because here is what the mind does not negotiate with. When you are in a state of unmet safety, the body knows it. When you have not felt truly belonging in years, the nervous system knows it. When your sense of esteem has been chronically undermined by failure, by comparison, by a culture that measures worth in performance metrics, Something in you registers that deficit, regardless of how loudly the rational mind insists that everything is fine. The body does not accept reassurance, it only accepts resolution. And that is the part that Maslow was pointing toward, quietly and with great patience for his entire life. Not that the pyramid was a motivational tool, but that it was a diagnostic map, a way of reading what the human organism actually needs versus what the culture was demanding it produce without meeting those needs first. The intuition that happiness is just around the corner, reachable through one more effort, one more achievement, one more improvement, is not wisdom. It is the mind trying to avoid the deeper excavation that actual peace requires. So let us come back to now. Let us come back to you specifically sitting with whatever weight you have been carrying into this conversation. The tiredness that does not go away with sleep, the sense of disconnection that persists even when you are surrounded by people, the low-grade anxiety that finds a new object every time you solve the previous one, the motivation that arrives in waves and disappears unpredictably, the feeling of being perpetually almost there, as though the version of your life that makes sense is just one adjustment away. These are not character flaws. These are not weaknesses. These are not signs that you are fundamentally broken or insufficient. These are signals. They are your system telling you in the only language it has available that something foundational is not yet met. That before you can genuinely live at the level of purpose, of contribution, of creative expansion, of authentic connection, something underneath needs to be acknowledged and attended to. The weight you feel is not the evidence of your failure. It is the evidence of unfinished architecture. And the difference between those two interpretations is the difference between spending the rest of your life driving harder on the same road and actually turning to look at the map. Maslow's insight was not that self-actualization is impossible. His insight was that self-actualization is impossible before its time, that you cannot live from the top of the structure before the structure exists. That the human being who tries to skip the foundation in pursuit of the peak does not arrive at the peak with more speed. They arrive at the peak with less of themselves because pieces of them were left behind at every level they tried to bypass. The restlessness you feel when you achieve something and it is not enough is not ingratitude. It is your deeper self accurately reporting that the achievement addressed the wrong level. The burnout that hits after years of productive effort is not weakness. It is a system that was running on willpower where it needed to be running on groundedness. And willpower ran out because it always runs out, while groundedness could have been a well that kept refilling. The loneliness that sits underneath a busy, connected, active life is not irrationality. It is the honest reporting of a belonging need that social performance cannot satisfy. You can be in the room with everyone and still be deeply alone, and that experience will not resolve by adding more people to the room. It will only resolve when the quality of presence changes, when connection stops being performance and starts being truth. This is what Maslow meant. Not a productivity ladder, a map of what makes a human being whole. And the final truth, the one that this whole conversation has been moving toward, is this: you do not need to do more, you need to go deeper. The happiness you have been pursuing, the version that lives on the other side of achievement, on the other side of discipline, on the other side of having finally figured everything out, that happiness does not exist. Not because happiness is impossible, but because that particular address does not correspond to a real location in human experience. What does exist is something quieter and far more durable. It is not the high of achievement. It is not the relief of completion. It is the steady, low-frequency hum of a life that is meeting its actual needs. Safety that is real, not performed. Connection that is honest, not curated. A sense of competence that is grounded in genuine experience rather than manufactured through comparison. And eventually, when the foundation holds, a life that points towards something larger than the self. That is what Maslow was mapping, not the dream of perfection, the architecture of enough. And the reason most people never find it is not that they are not trying hard enough. It is that they are searching for it on the wrong floor. The ceiling of your happiness is not determined by your ambition. It is not determined by your intelligence, your work ethic, or your commitment to growth. It is determined by the lowest unmet need in your structure, not the top, the bottom. That is the human limit that Maslow discovered. Not that happiness is impossible, not that fulfillment is an illusion, but that you cannot build the life you want from the middle of the building without first returning to the ground. And the ground is not behind you. It is not in the past. It is not inaccessible because of what happened before. It is available right now, in this breath, in the honest inventory of what is actually missing versus what you have been told is missing, in the willingness to stop accelerating and to look with real clarity at what the foundation actually requires. That is where the work begins, not more, deeper. If this conversation opened something for you, if something in here landed in a place that had been waiting for a word to name it, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That small action is what allows this kind of reflection to reach more people who need it. And there are many of them out there, carrying the same weight, looking for the same map. Help them find it. Thank you for being here.